So now we're going to learn how to create relative frequency tables with Python and just by hand as well. So we have 200 high school students were surveyed to see if they prefer to watch football or soccer. And then they were also asked if they were born inside of the US or outside of the US. So here are the results below. So what we're going to do is to create a relative frequency table, we're going to get overall totals. So we are going to get this row total for people that like football by adding 113 and 17. And that is 130. And then here we're going to add 7 plus 63 and get 70. And then the overall grand total here is 200. And then similarly, I'm going to get my column totals by adding 113 and 7. And I got 120. And then 17 and 63 as well. And I got 80. So now we're going to divide each of these numbers by 200. So I'm going to do 113 divided by 200, and then write my answer as a decimal. So as a decimal, this is equal to 0.565. Similarly here, this is 7 out of 200, which is 0. And I'm going to write that out too so you can see what I'm doing. 7 out of 200 is equal to 0.035. And then born in the US is 17 out of 200. And that gives us 0.085. And then here, this is 63 out of 200. And then that is 0.315. And then, so I'm just going to leave those there. So here, I can do these percentages as well. If I wanted to figure out my total percent, I can add 0.565 plus 0.085. And we would say, well, 0.65 or 65% of people like football. And then for soccer, similarly, I can add 0.035 plus 0.315 and get 35%. And then this would add up to 1 or 100%. So here, what percentage of the respondents were born in the US and like football? That is, if I did a percentage, I'm going to change this to 56.5%, just move the decimal 2 spots. And then here, what percentage of the respondents were born outside of the US and like soccer? So here, outside of the US and like soccer is 31.5%. What percent of respondents like football? So here that's at 65%. What percent like soccer? Again, moving the decimal 2 spots from the 0.35, it's 35%. What percent of the respondents were born in the US? So here I have to get my column totals on percentages. So 0.565 plus 0.035 gives me 60%. And then similarly, I know that if this is a 1 and that's 0.6, it's going to have to be 40% or 0.4. So born in the US, 0.6. If you notice, I would have to add a 0 to move it 2 spots, so it's 60%. Outside of the US was 40%. Now here, of the respondents that liked football, what percent were born in the US? Now, if you look here, I can go up here. Of the people that like football, there's 130 people. Born in the US is 113. So what I need to do is write this as 113 out of 130, and then convert that fraction to a decimal. So I can just take 113 and divide that by 130, and I get 0.8692 or 86.92%, or really I could just round that to 87%. So now what we're going to do is look at creating this table in Python. So here, I'm going to start with my code. We don't have a file to import here, so I'm going to import the libraries. So I imported pandas as PD and matplotlib pyplot as plot. Now the first thing I'm going to do is create my data frame. So the first row I put PD pandas.data frame of, and then I'm making the whole data frame. So you put that in the brackets, and then each row goes in brackets. And then what I'm going to do is use that set axis and put born in the US, outside of the US. The axis there is column. In place is going to be true. That means that's just replacing what was there. And then set axis for football and soccer on the rows. And then I'm going to print that. You could also just type in df1 too, and it'll look a little bit different. So if you notice that if I just put in df1, it looks slightly different on your notebook than if I put print of df1. Note, if you're not working with a notebook, you do have to put print for it to actually print. So I'm going to create a column that sums the rows. So I put row sum equals the data frame of born in the US plus the data frame of born outside of the US. And then to do the row sum, it just will put football, and then it has the numbers, and then soccer, and then it has my numbers. So what I can do now is find the grand total by doing the sum, row sum, and then summing those two numbers. So I put row sum dot sum. It just takes these two numbers and adds them. And then I printed the total, it's 200. Now to make a relative frequency table, what I do is take the data frame 1 and just divide it by 200. And then it'll put here, and then I printed it. It puts that as a relative frequency table now. So now what I'm going to do is look at the marginal frequencies, and we're going to be creating bar plots. So on here, I created my sums. So the sum of the US, sum of the outside of the US, and then my total. And now what I'm going to do is take this data where it says, and then I'm going to put born in the US, born outside of the US. And then I'm going to put my total, which is sum of the US and sum of the outside of the US. So it just says national origin, and then I have a total. And then what I'm going to do is create a bar graph with that. So I'm going to plot a bar of the national origin, and then my total number. The title is going to be national origin. X label is national origin. Y label is says GDP per capita. That's obviously incorrect. I'm just going to put count. It's the number of people. And then I put show, and then it does that. So now what we're going to do is sum the columns, so the row sum. So now we're going to sum those rows. So we're going to do the row sum, and now we're summing what sport people like. So I'm creating a new data frame where it says I have sport, and the two options are football and soccer. And then we take the total, which is row sum of 0 and row sum of 1. And then we call that data frame 2 of it, and then we're going to print it. And if you look, that has that. We have 130 people like football, 70 people like soccer. And now we're going to make that and change that into a bar graph. So we're going to do data frame 2 on the x-axis, we're putting sport. And then on the y-axis, we're putting the total. We're calling the title favorite sport. The x label, we're just putting sport here. The y label, we're putting total people, or we could put count as well, like we did last time. And now for the practice problems, I'm going to have you guys struggle with this alone. So try the codes a little bit on your own. Create these by hand, and then also do them with Python. You can look if you need to, but really you should go back and refer to your problems up here, and then just change the code as you need to. And then similarly, for the check for understanding, you're going to take the people that live in the city or the country, see if they liked hot dogs or hamburgers, make a relative frequency table, answer some questions on them, and then create the two tables using Python. So use the code that was shown to you and then just change it appropriately to put in the appropriate numbers and column labels and find the relative frequencies.